Apple's definitely doing the right thing by making their technology more secure. Companies have a responsibility for their millions of customers around the world to continue to improve the security of those products, and it's unconscionable to think that they would leave open vulnerabilities that anyone could discover out there to be taken advantage of.
Sure, but Jamil, is there a difference between leaving open vulnerabilities and making sure that law enforcement can access information it needs?
Yeah, well, actually, what Apple's doing here is really engaging in an arms race with the law enforcement community. They've been doing this since 2014, since the Snowden leaks, trying to one-up the law enforcement community and prevent them from getting access to these phones. And the reality is that in order for law enforcement to do their job, they've got to have access to the phones of spies, terrorists, and child molesters. Without that, law enforcement can simply not do their job, even when they have an order from a federal judge.
Yeah, Oren, how can you disagree with that?
I can disagree with that. Jamil, the government's been talking about going dark since people stopped using Morse code. And actually, advances in technology are the greatest boon to the national security establishment, both law enforcement and the intelligence side of it. It gives us more capabilities than ever. It's simply untrue what you're saying. In fact, as the Washington Post reported, the number of cases where encryption has been an issue have been grossly misstated by the government. One of the reasons why it's great to work at a place like the National Security Agency, where I did for 6 years, is because there are real dangers in the world. I've seen the evil that's out there, but it's not something we trade our principles as Americans and make the world less safe for people, particularly our citizens.
Oren, isn't one of our principles search and see? I mean, if you're suspecting someone of a crime, they have information on the phone that could support that one way or the other. Why shouldn't law enforcement have access to that the way they currently have access to other private property?
Well, there's a difference between allowing hacks or technical vulnerabilities or capabilities that the government does not control. What you're describing are judicial processes and things that can be worked through the courts where information can be turned over or it can be unlocked. So, of course, that's
Apple
standard.
Allow them to maintain access to that kind of information, having moved through the legal system in the proper way?
The challenge again, as I would say, is that there's no way to keep those vulnerabilities limited just to U.S. law enforcement. A lot of smart people here in the United States, but there are a lot of smart people around the world, and certainly as we discover those, it's impossible to keep them locked up and away from others who might use them for nefarious purposes.
Jamil, what about that? Is there a difference between, in the case of your physical house, for example, there's a process by which law enforcement can gain access, but presumably no one else can. Is the phone different? Is having one way for law enforcement and also a way to let other people in who shouldn't be in there?
Absolutely not. I mean, Kelly, look, the reality is that the Constitution doesn't say that you can never read Ben Franklin's diary. What it says is if you want to read Ben Franklin's diary, you've got to go to a federal judge, get a federal court order, a warrant, and then you get lawful access to that. The same is true of phones. There's nothing new or different about phones or locked houses or safes. Law enforcement has always had access to it for the last 225 plus years. There's no reason to change that policy now. And all Apple's doing is engaging in arms race with the government. All that does is actually make our privacy less safe because it forces the government to go to outside third parties where they don't have to go to a federal judge and then just break into phones.
What happens, Jamil, if they get to the point where the technology literally says, and maybe it's because of the messaging service being encrypted, maybe the phone itself is the physical barrier, where law enforcement cannot gain access? Will there have to be, the Supreme Court going to have to rule on this, say you must let them in?
Well, look, I mean, we've seen that happen before. We saw it happen with the San Bernardino shooter's phone. That was a phone that was owned by the government, by the county of San Bernardino. Apple would not work with the government to let them in. Ultimately, what will happen is if there's a mass casualty attack or, frankly, a single child kidnapped or molested, Megan Kanka or Polly Klaas, what you'll see is a revolt, and Congress will be forced to take action. And then we'll be worse off because we'll have worse, less privacy protective legislation. The right time to do this is now when we have an opportunity in the calm moment.
Oren, is there a way to build it in to satisfy both groups, both law enforcement and people who don't want others gaining access to their information?
Well, first, I would say, again, the claims in terms of the number of cases where this has impacted law enforcement have been grossly misstated. And again, I would remind everyone that people have been talking about both law enforcement and intelligence community going dark since Morse code became less popular. Encryption is not something that's new. It was derived in 44 BC by Julius Caesar himself. And again, I would mention that technology advances in the long term are a boon for the types of law enforcement and national security work that make America safe. They are not designed to become frictions.
Jameel, last
well,
word.
in its zeal to crack that, and I just one more, in its zeal to crack the iPhone, the arms race has not been initiated by Apple. It's been initiated by the United States government, who essentially opened up a hacking challenge for.
Well, you could say it's been initiated by users who broke the law. Jameel, last word to you.
That's totally false. The reality is that until 2014, Apple allowed lawful access to iPhones all the time. It was only after the Snowden disclosures that all of a sudden Apple decided, well, now's the time to start shutting everything down. They didn't feel like it was unsafe or insecure then, and now we've just seen every time law enforcement gets a way to access, Apple shuts it off. And so this is going to be a real problem. And ultimately, what this is going to result in is legislation, and that's going to be worse for privacy. The better thing to do is for law enforcement and the government and private industry to work together and find a sensible path forward.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.